David Proust just did an analysis of the first Pro Chess League and all the great stats that came along with it. Although Georg Meyer leads the league with 29.5 points going into the semifinals, it is actually Wesley So who has the highest performance rating. That won't surprise many of you who follow the league. He scored a remarkable 26 out of 28 points in the league going into the semifinals, where he's still alive. He might even earn more, might even get to that magical 30 mark. What we have done is go through all 28 games, and we have found the top 10 moves of Wesley So's Pro Chess League debut. We present them in order. So at number 10, a defensive effort. It looks like Wesley's in big trouble. His bishop is being double attacked, and what to do? First thought was to push the move pawn c3, but if you do that, something diabolical like knight to d4 will come down the board, and if that knight gets to b3, it is all over. So you might stare at the board and think that it's time to resign, but not so. Wesley had seen this position, and he figured out that rook to b3 works. It looks like he's just dropping a rook, because after rook takes, queen takes, he's down a rook, but not so. The move pawn to d7, and now this rook has too much to do. Wesley has seen more. That will surprise no one. Queen b8, takes, and as you might guess, it was a long conversion, but with the extra pawn and it being a pass pawn, Wesley won a long endgame. We move on to move number 9. Wesley takes the white pieces again, and he should win this endgame, although it's a little tricky. There are some menacing black pawns near his king, and his king's a little bit loose. Now you might wonder, is it time to consolidate into a king and pawn ending? Well, he had the chance here with his rook on pre to just play queen takes, rook takes, king takes, but it turns out this is not so easy. Even though white has an extra pawn after king takes a3, it is black who has the outside pass pawn. The computer says draw, but if you're white, you could even lose if you're not careful. For example, a variation where my king moves up and the white king moves up, the black king could come charging down. It's also possible the black king just goes sideways. You'll have to trust me, though. This is not a winning endgame. Even if it was, it wouldn't be that easy to calculate. So let's take a look at what Wesley does instead. If we back up to this position, after a5, what does he do? Well, he plays rook b3 again. That's right, the exact same move. I thought it was kind of funny to add that as number 9. And now, after the move a4, the black pawn's a little bit closer, and that makes all the difference in the world. That subtle change was picked up on by the world number 2. Now queen takes b7, takes, and it's easy because king takes a3 and the black pawn is one square closer, meaning after king b6, king takes a4, and you know the rest. Couple extra pawns in the ending. This was not hard to win. We move on to move number 8. Wesley did have a bit of luck this season, as you might imagine, getting 26 out of 28 possible points. And here is one example. He's black, and it looks like he's in for a long defense. Maybe you can hold it with perfect play, but I think in most Grandmaster games, white has excellent winning chances. Rather than wait for the white pawns to come down the board and attack his own king, he strikes back with the number 8 move, g5. Who would think to weaken his own king when you're defending a rook and minor piece against queen ending? Now, I can't prove this, but I believe he actually saw the drawing technique the moment he played g5. Can I prove it? No, but I'm going to ask him next time I see him. Here's how the game played out. After king to g2, king to g7, we had h4, and he takes this one. Now, the problem for white is to collect this pawn, he has to move his king up, and that's just a little bit too close to the danger zone, because Wesley played the move knight c5, and after king takes f4, it's actually already a draw by force. Knight to d3 check. Now, you might say knight d3 check should be the number 8 move, but like I said, I think the move g5 that led to this position is the real star move. If the king moves up, of course, we mate white, rook to e5, and instead, if the king goes backward, there's a very surprising perpetual. Rook to e3 check, and the rook just toggles between the first, second, and third ranks. For example, king to g2, rook to e2 check, and when the king tries to get close enough to the rook with a move like king f1, well, I just check you on e1, and you have to go back to g2. And very sadly for white, white was so against the perpetual that he moved his king to the square f3 and in fact lost the game after knight to e5, forking the king and the queen. One of the many close escapes for Wesley in this Pro Chess League season. We move on to move number 7. Wesley's white. And what we didn't see is earlier in the game, he played a very creative exchange sacrifice to net himself a center pawn. Now, technically, the sacrifice wasn't quite sound, so I can't give him credit for that being the star move, but he's battled back to this position, and while his move might be a little bit obvious, it does not lack power. Here he played the number 7 move, f4. By opening up some dark squares, this bishop, his worst piece, becomes his best one, as we'll see in a couple of moves. h6 admittedly was not the best response, but white has already at least equalized an impractical play. I think white has a much easier chance after f4. So h6, but then it's all over after pawn takes, and bishop to e7. That bishop becomes the hero. It was already time for black to resign. There's no way to save the queen or the rook, and of course, trading rooks doesn't get you anywhere, because now when you save your queen, my queen just hops in. I'm going to mate you in a couple of moves because you have no protectors around your black king. We move on to move number 6. Wesley is black, and again he finds himself just that little bit worse. His pieces are less mobile, and of course the bishop should be a little better than the knight when the pawns are scattered across the board. So, how does he respond to the move f3? Well, humans would take the pawn or play f5 or some move like this, but if you take the pawn, one of two bad things will happen. Either you will activate white's bishop, which has wanted to come to life for a while, or white will take back with the pawn and he'll have two mobile pawns coming down the board. Either way, that's not too desirable, so I really love the subtlety of this move. Wesley plays the number 1 computer suggestion, which is this coy little move, king f8, completely ignoring his pawn. Now, what does that do? Well, after this pawn takes later on in the game, white will have no control over the e5 square, and the extra pawn is completely moot. Black would love to secure this square for his knight, and in fact he does in a couple of moves. Wesley went on to secure an equal ending, and in fact won on time when white flagged in a drawn position. So I love the idea of leaving the pawn there on e4. It's a really subtle idea, but once you see it happen in the game, it completely makes sense. We move on to move number 5. It turns out not only did Wesley So make his big breakthrough last year, he made a series of breakthroughs in his Pro Chess League games. We're about to see 3 of them. Chess teachers out there, if you ever need to cobble together 3 similar positions to teach your kids about a lesson topic, look no further than positions 5, 4, and 3. Here against Grandmaster Christian Kirilla, it looks like white can't quite break through, but not so. Wesley finds the breakthrough, pawn to b6. Of course, if you take this way, the a pawn marches through, so instead c takes, but then I take with my bishop. Again, you can't take because the a pawn still becomes the hero, and after king c6 takes, although you do lose your b pawn, Wesley comes around and wins the e pawn, making sure to advance his king before he loses control of the b5 square. And after king over and takes, it was a long process to outflank the black king, involving several Zugzwans that even the computer didn't see. I encourage you to play through the rest of this game in the PGN to show exactly how he converted his very, very slightly winning advantage. Let's move on to position 4, where we're going to see another breakthrough that the computer doesn't understand. Here Wesley takes out fellow world top 5 Maxime Vachier-Lagrave with relative ease. In fact, he had almost 10 of his 15 minutes remaining when he won this game. He's got the bishop pair, he's got the queenside pawns marching. I'm going to show you the lead in here. I think what Maxime is worried about is if white plays a move like b6 and these pawns trade, then there actually will be kind of a surprising idea by white coming up. He might move his bishop to the square a6 and make a breakthrough that way. For example, let's just give black some sort of random chess move. So we push, take, and now coming up on the next turn is bishop to a6, a nice bishop sack breakthrough. So the reason I wanted to show you that is to help you understand Maxime's reaction. He played b6 himself to try to stop it, but it turns out even that doesn't help, because after takes and takes, we arrive at the number 4 move for Wesley So, which is bishop to c5, and yes, it is important you choose c5 and not a5. The reason being, after takes, push to b6, then if the knight hops into d6 to stop the pawn, we can then take, and those 2 pawns are going to overpower the knight. Really, really important that we have that possibility. That's probably what Maxime missed. He thought knight to d6 would blockade the pawn. Maybe he'd have to sacrifice the knight for the pawn after bishop a6, but in any case, white's pawns will march through. So Maxime tried to get some counterplay with bishop to h6, thinking that maybe he can get 2 minors for the queen. But after pawn f4 blocking that possibility, c4, and the bishop decides, well, if I'm going to be lost, remember, you can't go back to the square c2 because then knight to d6 will hold on. Instead of just pushing the pawn to b7, Wesley says, let's get at least 1 pawn for my piece. and after takes, b7, f5. It wasn't much of a contest. The queen easily defeated the two minor pieces as Maxime gave up in a few more moves. We have one final breakthrough that lands at spot number 3. Here we have Wesley's second game against Grandmaster Malik Kashian. He had all kinds of problems with the California-based Grandmaster this year. Could have very easily lost both games against him. Instead, he survived with a draw in his first game, and in this game, he should have lost, but he actually ended up winning. Further analysis has shown that Grandmaster Kashian could have won with f4, and it is actually black who would have run out of moves first, and when that happens, the white king would have taken on c4, and the passed pawn would have won. I'll leave it to you to work out why f4 wins. But after the mistake pawn to a3, Wesley was the best at capitalizing this year on inaccurate moves. Black actually wins with the surprising breakthrough pawn to f5. And now white has basically run out of moves, because if white tries a4, then we push the pawn, and takes. It is white's turn. He has no good moves, and after his king moves, black will take, and black extra pawn decides the day. So let's back up for a second. Instead, after the move pawn to f5, white decided to capture, but then of course the h-pawn runs free after h5, and it is too far away for the white king, especially keeping in mind that this pawn on c4 has yet to be dealt with. So after push, the king goes back, but it is black's pawns that are too far separated, and white had to resign. We move on to the best two moves of Wesley's season. For this one, I'm going to cheat a little bit, or call it artistic license. I'm going to show you two key moves, both of which are a bit interrelated. They're both impress the eye, and in this position with Wesley as black, he played the intuitive pawn sacrifice, pawn to d5. It is computer approved, and you know if the computer approves of a long-term pawn sacrifice, it must have some teeth. The idea is that he's going to give away the d pawn just to be able to open up the e file and get control of the second rank. He accurately predicted that that would lead to some fruit later on down the road. After knight takes, and pawn takes, it is the second rank that black is eyeing. He throws in the move bishop to f5, but after the queen moves, then the rook heads down to the square e2. Now the real star move, which came out of this pawn sacrifice, we're going to fast forward to. If we could just move on here, 6 moves down the road, black's pieces have all come to life, but how to break through? Well, not sure if I gave you enough time to look at it, but Wesley So found the brilliant deflection bishop to b3, and that bishop cannot be captured, because if it does, then rook takes leads to mate. After king takes, our queen gets the invasion. We're down a rook, but it doesn't matter, because after king h1, queen takes, king up, it is mate on g1. Backing up, after bishop to b3, of course, the bishop cannot be captured, but after queen to d3, Wesley won a little more prosaically by bishop takes d5, and funnily enough, you still can't take because of the exact same tactic that I just showed you. Well, it's going to take a lot to top that one, but we do arrive now at the number 1 move of Wesley So's Pro Chess League season. Well, Wesley had a lot of slow grinds in closed double king pawn positions this season, but one of his more turbulent games tops the list. Here he's black, and white has just played the move pawn to c3. What to do? Well, the normal retreat bishop to e5, even though it looks like a lot of pieces are bearing down on white's king, fails to pawn to d4 with a discovered attack on the rook, and black is worse. Turns out, later analysis has shown that black could actually survive with queen to h8, and maybe he has a very small advantage, but that certainly would not be as much fun and would not make the top chart of our list. So, what do we do? I'll give you a second to think about it. We don't save the bishop at all. Black is completely winning. The only completely winning move, rook takes f5, and white's underdeveloped pieces cost him the game. Because after rook takes f5, bishop takes f5, Wesley has actually sacrificed his own rook. Queen to g8 check, king moves up to e7, queen takes, and now a very subtle bishop move threatens an unstoppable first-rank invasion. Now, it would have been really nice if Wesley could have played bishop to g4, with the idea that if knight goes to f3 to block, he could actually take with his queen. That would be incredibly impressive. In fact, it might still win, but you could certainly understand Wesley not wanting queen takes b7 to result in a check and allowing any sort of counterplay. So he plays the slightly more mundane bishop to d7, but it was no less crushing because white resigned on the spot. I guess that pretty much makes it a better move. If he'd played bishop g4, white wouldn't have resigned. White would have played queen takes b7 and see if he could get some checks in. So bishop to d7, and there is no way to stop first rank invasions. If you do try to put your knight in the way, I'll just take, and of course if you take back, I mate you with queen takes f3. But if you don't take, pawn f2 is completely crushing, not to mention pawn takes probably wins as well. Everything is winning, and so there you have it. Our number one move was rook takes f5. Congratulations, Wesley So, for achieving the highest performance rating leading into the semifinals. We will see how it all shakes out if his good fortune and his good skill continues in the final two matches of the season.